and welcome back to Grab a Seat, the show run by students in the Independent California Colleges Advocate program. We're your hosts today. My name is Ashley Blancas, and I'm a recent grad from Mount St. Mary's University who majored in political science, and I'm also the current ICAP communications co-chair.
Then hi, I'm Trinity Huynh. I am a political science major and peace studies minor at Chapman University and the ICAP policy and budget co-chair. In today's episode, we're grabbing a seat with Veronica Villalobos Cruz, Managing Director of Cruz Strategies. Veronica has worked on Cal Grant advocacy for quite some time as an in-house and contract lobbyist. Thank you for joining us, Veronica.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to go ahead and get started with one of the first questions. So we'd love to get your perspective on how we got to where the Cal Grant Award is at right now. So could you walk us through the last year's AICCU sponsored legislation, Senate Bill 851, authored by Senator Portantino? What did the bill intend to do for the ICCU students, and what was the outcome of that bill?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess a little bit of history about the Cal Grant Award to put it in context. But since 2001, when the Cal Grant Entitlement Program was created, the award level for students to go to independent colleges was never set in statute. So it was never set in law. So that means every year AICCU advocates to protect the award or to increase the award, depending on like what the budget context is. And so since I think the highest has been 9,708. And since then, in the early 2000s, it's really gone up and down. And so what we've been trying to do the last couple of years really is trying to get it back up to what we had 20 plus years ago, right? And like I said, unfortunately, there isn't any sort of guidance of what our award level should be. So we have to fight for an incremental increase during the budget process. And so last year we did advocacy through the budget process, which is different from the legislative process. So we had, a strategy to work through the budget committees. And then we had a strategy to work through the legislative process with Senator Portantino, who was absolutely wonderful. And he's been really supportive of the independent colleges. He has, I think, close to a dozen in his district, down in the Pasadena, Claremont area. And so what we did last year was fight for a small increase, an incremental increase to the maximum award. And then we also fought for closing the gaps on two issue areas where our students were left out of increases in previous years. One was our foster students or former foster students were not eligible to receive what they had adopted as a supplemental award, so award that went on top of the maximum award. And even those students at the public universities were able to get it, and it's pretty significant. It's an additional $6,000. And the same thing happened for students who are parents in the public segments, and we were left out of that increase in previous years. So last year, due to the budget surplus, which was amazing and significant, it was close to $100 billion. We were able to secure both the supplemental award for our former foster students, a supplemental award for our parent students, and then an increase to our maximum award grant. So it's just a little above 9,200. And again, we have to make sure that's protected or increased every year in the annual budget process. So, the student advocacy is important every year. Consistent presence in the Capitol is very important. Consistent messaging is important just because it's never, we need to protect it. It's not necessarily an entitlement for our students, the amount. So, I just want to, again, thank Senator Portantino, because I think he was instrumental in making sure we were successful in that effort, in the budget effort.
That's great, considering previously that these students weren't entitled to that award.
Yeah, definitely.
Now we can, fight for it.
Yeah, I
and
mean, it's a constant challenge
continue
to
forward.
say, yeah, it's a constant challenge to, I think, get the legislature to realize that we have students in our sector that are in similar situations as students at CSU and UC in the community college, right? Like everyone, people, whether you're a student at UC or Claremont or Fullerton, like you may be struggling with housing. You're probably struggling with the cost of living increases, maybe struggling with the cost of food. You also may be helping your parents with some cost. So we kind of have to educate policymakers that California students in our sector are facing similar challenges. So we're not, all wealthy. We're very diverse, and so we would like to be considered for the same amount, the same level of aid.
Yeah. And then moving forward, I see on the 2023 AICCU Impact Report that the average reward amount each student receives from the state varies significantly by the sector. 8,528 for students at independent California colleges like us, 16,000 and $25 for students attending CSUs, and $26,000 and 946 or $26,946 for students attending a UC. Could you help us understand how the state came up with such varied award amounts? It seems like students at ICCUs get the lowest Cal Grant award compared to both of these sectors.
Yeah, so if you include what the state pays for one student, Cal Grant student at UC and CSU, those amounts are correct, right? But if you just include like what the Cal Grant award is, the amounts are a bit different. So at UC and CSU, the general rule, which is in statute, says that the Cal Grant maximum is going to always equal the system-wide tuition. So as tuition at UC and CSU goes up or down, but typically it goes slowly up, then their Cal Grant will go up to cover that system-wide tuition. At our school, as we talked about, like we have to fight for the amount, and it's somewhat arbitrary because it's not linked to anything. It's not linked to our tuition. It's not linked to our costs. It's not linked to the cost of housing. Is just an award level that has gone up and fluctuated. But at UC, like the 26,000 price tag that you talked about includes the Cal Grant Maximum Award and also the money that the state provides UC to support the one student to go through the system. And that's every year. And they call that the marginal cost per student. So for every additional student at UC, the UC is going to get another chunk of money, right? And that's the way they calculate cost of attendance, or what the state spends. I'm sorry, what the state spends for that student. So we, in our arguments, we do point that out because, say Trinity, you wanted to go to UC Davis and you were Cal Grant eligible. And so they're going to spend an average of $26,000, right, to have you go to Davis. And that includes like what it would generally cost for like faculty and services and stuff like that, right? But if you went to University of the Pacific, which is 30 minutes away from Davis, they would only be giving you the $99,000, right? Or $9,200 maximum. They're not going to give UOP money. They're not going to give UOP money to support the faculty, services, facilities, nothing. So it's cheaper, right, for the state to say, okay, Trinity, I'm going to support you to go to UOP for 4 years with this Cal Grant, than to say, Trinity, it's cheaper to go to UC Davis and support you through graduation there. So we just urge the state always to like look at the total cost that they're meeting for one Cal Grant student going to UC and CSU, because then it is more if you look at marginal cost plus Cal Grant. Not to mention like any additional other services, that they may need, but so that's what where the numbers come from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really interesting. And I saw previously that, was it 2001 or 2000? that that was when the Cal Grant was at its peak for
Mm-hmm.
independent California college students.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really interesting. Could you provide some like historical context? Do you know why it's lowered despite inflation going up?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's yeah, like you said, the peak was in, I believe, 2000, 2001 at 9,708. And that, occurred because there was more adjustment over time, like in the 90s, to help students in our sector. And actually, the Cal Grant program before when it was created as the state scholarship program for just students in our sector. So I believe it was in 1955 it was created. And it was because at that point the state needed to use our capacity at our sector, right? So they saw we had Chapman and Mountain St. Mary's and Santa Clara and said, it is going to be cheaper if we fund our students to go to these schools at some amount than to create new universities, and right. So it did start in the independent sector, and so it really grew and leaned towards like the public sectors in 2001, I believe, when they created this entitlement program. So at that point they said any student, California student who meets the income, who meets the asset criteria, who meets the GPA criteria is promised a Cal Grant. And so that's when you had a lot more students come into the program, right? And now it's really shifted towards the public segments in terms of like who's where the majority of the cost is going. It's at UC and CSU. Same with like the middle class scholarship, which was created. God, when was that? Probably 6 years ago now, and that is through the Student Commission, meant to help middle class families, but it was also just created for UC and CSU. So, as you all know, like California has wonderful public universities. They're large. You have the community colleges, CSU, UC, and so it's a constant challenge to get our voices heard and to remind folks like we also serve students. Many of our students are low income or high need and are facing similar situations. So, please increase the Cal Grant amount by 10% or 5%, depending on what the budget scenario looks like. But you're right, it has not gone up since then, and it's lost a lot of value if you consider inflation. It's just difficult to, convince 120 members, right, that we need a significant increase. So it's like I think it helps to do incremental, smaller increases over time. And hopefully one day we can get a policy and statute that says, our award amount should be this every year and it's recalculated. But that's one of our AICCU's goal is to get a policy and statute that would dictate what our award amount would be every year. So students and families would know, colleges and universities would know, they could plan accordingly, and it's just more predictable all around.
Yeah, that would be great for
Yeah.
there to be a specific policy and legislation geared towards that, specifically just because right now ICCU students don't have that set amount award. And so because you guys fight for it every year, I can imagine how difficult it is, especially during budget deficits,
Oh, definitely.
to fight for that money for these
Yeah.
students. But then I think Ashley has a question.
Yeah, so as a contract lobbyist for AICCU, it's our understanding that you work in partnership with the AICCU team to meet with legislators and staff on the AICCU policy and budget priorities. Could you tell me a little bit more about some positive conversations that have taken place in recent years around Cal Grant reform?
Yeah, in recent years, there's been a lot of effort amongst various stakeholders about how to streamline the Cal Grant program to make it more simple for families and students to understand what it is, to apply for it, and also to want to make it more efficient and then also see if we can increase the awards, right? And so there's been a lot of effort among stakeholders, and then also community college students have been supportive of this effort called the Cal Grant reform. And what they want to do is streamline the two programs. We have A and B, right? Streamline them. There's concern about having a GPA minimum in the program by some, feeling that it should be kind of like an open access or ability to apply regardless if you have the minimum GPAs. And so there's been working groups, gosh, probably for the last 3-4 years. I kind of lost track in terms of like putting together what the structure would look like and what needs to be done to get from point A to B. And so there's the support in the legislature and the governor to reform. It's just going to cost, I believe it's going to cost a few $100 million to get to that place. And so what they've done in last year's budget is says, in principle, we support the effort, but we have to be considerate of the budget, right? And if we feel like there's not going to be enough money due to the economy, then we're not going to adopt it at this point. But we want to get there as a goal. And so that's where we're at. And it was not funded. Well, the budget's due next week to the legislature for 23-24. And thus far, it hasn't been funded in like the draft proposals. But it is a goal, I think, that many share. And that once the budget gets healthier, that it's something that can be phased in. So really the goal is to let's simplify and let's strengthen the program so that more students can apply and there's increased value to the grant. So that's extremely positive conversations that I think all around stakeholders, higher ed segments, they're all having. It's going to be, there's definitely concerns on implementation and systems and stuff like that. But I think the general goal folks are supportive around.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I know for most of us here, Day at the Capitol was very influential. For myself, as I was able to speak with Speaker Anthony Rendon, as I am from his constituent area. And so I feel like sharing my story among with other folks was very positive and, brought a better one-on-one experience. And whenever the proposal does come, he'll think about us and he'll think about other students that pretty much share their story and how the Cal Grant has a pretty strong influence on.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important that thank you for coming, guys, to Sacramento. It's so important. They need to hear your stories. You're the product of the program, right? And so you're the results, you're like the return on investment. So they need to see your face. They need to hear your stories, and it's more effective than, us in the building. So it's really great that the students took the time to come.
Exactly. So my experience was very similar. Like as a Cal Grant recipient and Pell Grant recipient, I was able to tell my story to various legislators and tell them what the Cal Grant has done for me personally, how I've been able to afford college and join clubs, and that there's still a need for an increase because it's very expensive, especially with living in California. It's very expensive in general. But with a private college, because the UCs and the CSUs are so impacted, so many students are now attending ICCUs. And so it's like 335,000, I believe, around that area amount of students from independent California colleges, or that are attending independent California colleges. Mm-hmm. And so a large amount of students attempting to achieve an degree in a higher education institution are really struggling with their finances to not only go to college, but also find housing and live. And so I think it's really important for us students to share our stories and um, for people like you to continue to advocate for important issues like this.
Yeah, no, I agree. Sadly, I mean, I went to a private university too. I went to Santa Clara, um, God, 20 years ago or 20 plus years ago. But I also got the Cal Grant and I also got a Pell Grant and a lot of institutional aid. And unfortunately, like the perception that only rich white people go to private universities is still out there, even though if you like visit a campus, it's very diverse and it's not the same as it was 20, 30 years ago. But the needs are just as great amongst our student population, right? So it's that education that needs to happen about who the independent colleges serve and what our families are like, what our parents do, why we want to go to an independent college. I know for me, I was shy and I don't think I could have like really um succeeded as well at a large public university just because of my personality. And I actually was able to like connect with a couple of faculty members at the university who um, made an effort to reach out to me, because I always was like, I don't want to bother them. I don't know what to say. But like they reached out to me and said, hey, you have skills here and let's develop better writing skills and you should apply to grad school. And this is what you should do, think about doing. And I don't know if that would have happened necessarily if I went to a big public university. Not a bad thing, but I think it's I think it was, I was privileged to be able to go, but just because I was low income doesn't mean I shouldn't have the right to really try to go, right? So it's like um I'd like to think of it that way. Like, a low income kid working super hard in high school, wanting to go to Stanford or wanting to go to Loyola Marymount, like they should have a right to try to go and the state should try to help. And
Yeah,
if that's where they're going to be successful, then let's try to support them.
yeah, I completely resonate with that. Like a lot
Yeah.
of public institutions, because they're smaller typically, they offer so many different resources
Yeah.
and networking opportunities that you wouldn't be able to like reach or find at public institutions. Like for
Yeah.
example, I wouldn't be able to have done research with professors if I hadn't gone to Chapman.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
And I
really
hear
does
that
make a
a lot.
difference.
Yeah, I do hear that actually the research opportunity a lot amongst Cal Grant students in our sector, where they really do get mentored by faculty. And I mean, I saw that in my own situation too. And you're right. Like, I don't know if I would have been aggressive enough, like in a big setting, to be like, "Okay, my turn. I need help, and I need a mentor." Where as a private university, we probably have a better chance of a faculty member or research assistant or a TA saying, "Hey, why don't you come work with me?" And you'll get some experience and you get paid. So I totally agree with that.
And then moving on to conversations in regards to the challenges of advocacy, what are some of the roadblocks that make it challenging to move legislation such as Senate Bill 851 forward?
Yeah. There's a couple of challenges. One is like California is the legislative session typically goes most of the year, right? So members have an opportunity to introduce a number of bills. I believe it's like 60 in the assembly, around there. So you're competing just in terms of like the number of bills and policy changes out there. And you have to elevate your issue high enough that it gets, one, the attention of staff and members and committees. And so there's just a lot that people are working on in California. It's not just like at the federal level where there's just like one big bill. So that's, I think, number one is just getting attention to your issue. Two is like depending on the budget. like this year we're in a deficit. It's close to 30 billion, maybe more. And so if you have a policy that's going to cost anything, it's going to be critiqued even more, right? So the state has a ton of budget priorities, and there's a ton of need in California. If you think between like K through 12, health, medical, the prison system, what would there, just like where all the money is going, you're competing for a little piece of the pie. And so depending on the budget situation, it could be even more challenging, where there's an automatic, like, no, we're not going to spend any more money. Like we're at, which I understand, like you have to have a balanced budget. And then three, I think it's the politics, so the AICCU is a nonprofit. Our institutions are nonprofit. We don't have a PAC. We don't give money to candidates, right? So when all these assembly members and senators are running for their term, we're not giving them money, and other interest groups are. And so there's a ton of money out there going towards policymakers through their campaigns. And that provides, access to them, right? It provides more time with them, it provides more face-to-face, it provides familiarity and friendship. So, and it's a challenge in the education world because we don't do that. And so really we have to rely on our issue and the merits of our issue and who we are serving. But it's a challenge all the time. So just getting face time, right, with the right people and leadership and that's common for a lot of groups that advocate and don't give to campaigns. So yeah, there's a number of challenges, both like with budget and politics and just with the sheer number of what's going on in California.
Thank you so much for sharing the reality, Veronica.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why we are involved in this podcast is to bring our voices to the table, and we recognize that it's up to us to make our voices heard. One of the last questions that I have for you is, from your seat, what impact has ICAP slash the student voice had on your advocacy work these last 4 years since ICAP's existence?
Well, it's made it much stronger. There's always been a student presence with like UC and CSU and the community colleges. They have student associations, student government for the segment. They have designees that do government relations for them students. So we never had that. And just because each campus is independent, right? And so the ability to have student voices involved is like super significant and effective. It's made our jobs obviously easier to say, well, haven't you met with you met with Trinity, or you met with Ashley during lobby day? Like, do you remember her story? Because I think it is really true that policymakers, they remember your stories and they're impacted by your stories. And when they are then faced with the vote of whether they want to support, SB 851 last year, they will say, oh yeah, I remember meeting with Ashley and her story was super impactful. This is really valuable. It's a really effective program. We're using our money in the right way. And so they will vote yes. So it's really hard for me sometimes to say like, well, there's this girl, Ashley, the woman, Ashley at Mount St. Mary's, and she's unbelievable, but it's so if they meet you face to face, it's just something that's much more impactful and it stays with them when they're making the decisions. And so it just has to be consistent, obviously, because they have so much coming at them that we need like consistent ambassadors, right, throughout the years. And so this program is great because it's set up to train you all to be those ambassadors. And then there's always, new folks coming in, and you guys are growing to be a stronger, bigger group that I think, is really effective. So thank you guys.
No, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. We've covered a lot. And now we'll turn it over to Catherine, one of our fellow cohort members who's a transfer student and has a question for you regarding financial aid.
Okay. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Veronica. So my name is Catherine, just like Trinity said, and I was a community college student. I transferred from Santa Monica College to USC a couple of years back. And I think something that a lot of my fellow transfer students would agree about is that navigating higher education as a transfer student and a community college student can be particularly difficult
Mhm.
for a variety of reasons, whether that's academic, systematic, cultural, financial, and so forth. And, as you kind of discussed earlier, it seems like there's lots of support for students that are looking to attend public universities, but not so much that are specifically dedicated towards transfer and community college students who want to attend private universities.
Mhm.
So, my question to you is how, at least in your opinion, does the state view making investments towards transfer students that want to attend ICCUs?
Yeah, that's a really great question because I think when Governor Brown was in office, he really did focus a lot on transfer students. And AICCU committed to increasing their transfer numbers and working with all of their member institutions to try to adopt a program that is a transfer program between the community colleges and the CSU, the ADT program, Associate's Degree in Transfer. And it's not like the I guess the answer to everything, but it is a program that attempts to streamline what students have to take in order to transfer. And so I believe about 36, 38 of our institutions did adopt it. And so that makes it easier for students to know that what courses they're taking will be transferable. But I do think we're failing transfer students with financial aid. I don't think obviously it's extremely, it's expensive to go from a community college to a 4-year school if there's not like a promised grant, right? And so there is the transfer entitlement award, but there's a lot of kind of criteria around it, and so it could be barriers for some. But I think too, like one of the challenges is just outreach to students, letting them know who we are, like we can, how you can afford an institution in the private nonprofit sector, and like what the courses you should be taking, things like that. And so counselors are so important in this scenario. And I know it's a challenging situation at the community colleges with enough counselors. So I know a number of our institutions are trying to increase their outreach and information, make it easier, and also just have more face-to-face time with potential students. So it's definitely, I think, a challenge. And the fact that you were able to like navigate that says a lot about a student, in my perspective, like, okay, if you could navigate that system, you'll be fine at a 4-year. So I think it says a lot about a student who's able to like navigate all that and figure it out in itself. So I do think though our institutions are trying to figure out ways to spread the word that we're here, we're affordable, there's aid, all the above. But I think we need to figure out how to do it better. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Veronica, for joining us on Gravacy and walking us through the historical context of Cal Grant advocacy and highlighting the importance of getting involved. And thank you so much for advocating yourself and informing us and teaching us more about advocacy and the work that you and so many other people have done for students. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
And
you're welcome. Thank you all too for taking the time to get involved in AICCU's program. And I know this is outside your schoolwork and your work and your family and friends. So, but do realize it really does have an impact on not just like your aid package, but like your little brother and your little sister, your cousins, everyone behind you who is coming up and wants to go to college. So thank you all for your advocacy.
So, to the nearly 27,000 Cal Grant recipients and allies, we encourage you today to write, call, tweet, reach out in whichever way you can to your state elected officials and let them know why we should continue this investment in the Cal Grant program and why it's very essential, as well as how it provides access to the institutions of our choice and the best meets of our needs.
Thank you, ladies.
And don't forget, grab a seat and make a room for yourself at the table. See you next time.